John McEnroe went off, and nobody saw it coming. The man who spent decades screaming at umpires suddenly turned his fire on the world's #1 player, and the name he kept protecting was Alexandra Eyala. This wasn't commentary, this wasn't analysis. This was a veteran of tennis warfare drawing a line in the sand and daring Aryna Sabalenka to cross it. The tennis world froze, fans erupted, and somewhere in the eye of that storm stood a 20-year-old girl from the Philippines who never asked for any of this, yet found herself at the center of the biggest controversy women's tennis had witnessed in years. What actually happened between Sabalenka and Eyala? What did McEnroe know? And why did one of the sport's most volcanic personalities decide that this was his hill to die on? Stay with this story, because it only gets deeper from here. Before we talk about the explosion, you have to understand the spark. Alexandra Eyala was never supposed to be here this fast. Born in the Philippines, raised on hard courts, baking under Southeast Asian heat, she climbed the junior ranks with a style of tennis that confused opponents and seduced spectators simultaneously. Left-handed, touch-heavy, tactically wise beyond her years, she played the game like she was having a conversation nobody else could hear. When she arrived at the 2025 Miami Open as a wild card, most analysts gave her a polite nod and fully expected her to exit in the first round. The draw was brutal. The field was elite. Eyala had no seating, no protection, no safety net. What she had was talent, and the kind of calm that looks deceptively ordinary until you realize it is, in fact, extraordinary. Round by round, she dismantled opponents who had no business losing to her, at least according to the rankings. She defeated Jelena Ostapenko, a Grand Slam champion who plays like a controlled demolition. She neutralized Madison Keys, one of the hardest hitters on the WTA Tour. Then came Iga Swiatek, the dominant force of women's tennis for half a decade. Eyala beat her, too. The world stopped and stared. Former world #1 and 7-time Grand Slam champion Mats Wilander could barely contain himself. Speaking to TNT Sports, he declared Eyala someone with hands given by God, describing her talent as one that boils out of her fingers. He compared her artistry, her feel, her tennis intelligence to what John McEnroe himself produced in the 1980s. And that comparison, from that man, carries the full weight of history. Former pros on the Nothing Major podcast went even further. Sam Querrey asked point-blank whether Eyala had already become the biggest draw in women's tennis, bigger than Sabalenka, bigger than Coco Gauff. Steve Johnson's answer came without hesitation: yes. Courts in Melbourne were overwhelmed. Filipino fans created human bottlenecks outside Court 6, hundreds deep, refusing to leave. Dubai happened. Abu Dhabi happened. Manila nearly collapsed under its own passion. Wherever Eyala appeared, standing room-only scenes followed like a tide that couldn't be stopped. And then there was Aryna Sabalenka, world #1, 4-time Grand Slam champion, iron-willed and iron-armed, watching this 20-year-old girl rewrite the attention economy of women's tennis, watching the crowds shift, watching the conversations shift. Nobody acknowledged it publicly, but something underneath the surface had begun to shift as well. Was this admiration between two great competitors, or was it the earliest tremor of something far more dangerous? Here is what you need to understand about Aryna Sabalenka. She has never been a woman who shrinks. She spent 70 weeks atop the world rankings. She has won on every surface, in every pressure situation, against every kind of opponent the sport could produce. She survived personal tragedy, public scrutiny, and political complexity, all while maintaining dominance that few athletes in any sport can match. So when Eyala began drawing Sabalenka-level crowds, when commentators began framing the younger Filipina as not just a future rival, but a present alternative, Sabalenka did not visibly flinch. That is not her nature. But the 2025 U.S. Open told a different story in the margins. Eyala faced Clara Tauson in the opening round, and what unfolded was one of the most emotionally charged matches of the tournament. She grabbed the first set, lost the second, and found herself trailing 1-5 in the deciding third. Then she clawed back. 4-5, 15-40, 2 breakpoints on the line. A moment of controversy erupted when Eyala flicked a ball at the net and uncertainty surrounded whether her racket had crossed the tape, a violation if proven. Chair umpire Kader Nooni called for video review. The replay vindicated Eyala completely. The point stood. Tauson lost composure in a manner rare even for high-stakes tennis. "Look at the ball! What is your opinion about this? What is your opinion?" she shouted, hands on hips, refusing to serve, boos bouncing off the stadium walls. Eyala said nothing, stood still, waited. Tauson double faulted. 5-all. Arthur Ashe Stadium ignited. Eyala ultimately lost that match, but the moment crystallized something the tennis world had been circling for months. Opponents were beginning to feel the pressure of playing her, not just tactically, psychologically. The crowds, the energy, the weight of expectation that followed Eyala wherever she competed, all of it pressed against the composure of everyone across the net. And Aryna Sabalenka, who had lived on the opposite side of that pressure for years, had never faced anyone who generated it quite like this. Meanwhile, John McEnroe, the commentator, the voice of tennis across decades, the man who called games and shaped narratives on major broadcast platforms, began making observations that started as neutral and grew increasingly pointed. Something was building, and the tennis world, distracted by the spectacle, almost missed the moment it broke open.
Strip away the social media storms, strip away the McEnroe family's complicated legacy, strip away the tribal loyalty of Filipino fans and the defensive unity of Sabalenka's global following. What remains is a story about two women at completely different stages of a shared journey, and a tennis establishment that often turns generational rivalry into spectacle before it becomes genuine competition. The evidence of deliberate, systematic cheating against Eyala, in the legal, rule-violating sense of the word, was never conclusively documented. What McEnroe observed, and what inflamed him, was a pattern of pressure application that operates in the gray zone every elite competitor knows exists. Late bounces, extended towel breaks, deliberate decompression rituals deployed at precisely the moment an opponent builds momentum. Sabalenka uses these tools. So does every champion at her level. Novak Djokovic perfected the art of psychological pressure management long before anyone called it something uglier. Nadal built an entire pre-serve routine around it. The difference, and this is the piece McEnroe was circling, whether consciously or not, is that these tools carry different weight when used against someone younger, less experienced, less protected by ranking or reputation. Against Eyala, who still operates outside the seeded bracket in many draws, such tactics are not met with equal capacity for response. That asymmetry is real. Whether it constitutes cheating depends entirely on how you define the word. What the controversy produced, unexpectedly, was a wider examination of junior and young player protection within the WTA system. Were experienced players using legitimate competitive tools in ways that disproportionately targeted emerging competitors? Were the rules adequate? Were officials equipped to intervene? These were not McEnroe's questions, but his explosion, messy and overstated and characteristically loud, kicked the door open on conversations that needed to happen. Eyala, for her part, kept competing. She reached quarterfinals in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Manila in early 2026. She pushed toward the top 30 of the world rankings. Her star power, as former pros noted, continued escalating in ways that defied simple explanation. She did not collapse. She did not retreat. She kept moving forward with the same quiet devastation that had always defined her game. Sometimes the most powerful statement a person can make is refusing to stop. Long after the headlines dissolve, what this controversy deposits into tennis history is something more durable than drama. It deposits a question about what power looks like at the top of women's tennis and what responsibility accompanies it. Sabalenka remains the world's best tennis player. Her dominance is no rumor. 4 Grand Slam titles, 70 weeks at #1, victory at Indian Wells of Arybakina, victory at Miami. These are facts, not narratives, and they do not bend under McEnroe's criticism. But Eyala represents something the sport has not seen in precisely this form before. She is not simply a talented young player ascending a predictable ladder. She is a cultural force, a player who carries a nation's identity onto every court she walks across, who generates the kind of devotion that empties city streets in Manila when she plays, who has already been compared to McEnroe himself by one of the greatest champions the sport has ever produced. The collision between those two gravitational fields was never going to be quiet. McEnroe lit the match. The tinder had been accumulating for months in every overwhelming crowd Eyala attracted, in every broadcaster conversation about whether she had already surpassed Sabalenka as women's tennis's most compelling figure, in every slow-motion examination of a rivalry that hadn't officially begun yet. What makes this story genuinely lasting is not the controversy itself. It is the portrait it reveals of a sport in transition, a sport where one generation's dominance and another generation's emergence create friction that inevitably surfaces somewhere dramatic. Eyala said she wanted to steal Sabalenka's serve. That one sentence, casual and generous in its original context, captured something true about where these two women stand. Eyala is still acquiring. Sabalenka has already built. The question the sport now asks, quietly, beneath the noise, is how long that gap holds, and what happens to the establishment when someone with hands given by God finishes acquiring everything she needs. Was this a controversy, or the opening chapter of the most compelling rivalry women's tennis has ever witnessed? Drop your thoughts below. The court is yours. This story is far from finished. Eyala is 20 years old. Sabalenka is in the prime of her career. McEnroe will keep talking, because that is what McEnroe does. But somewhere between the accusations and the defenses, between the mob noise and the quiet competitor who refuses to break, something real is unfolding in women's tennis that deserves your full attention. If this video reached you, subscribe right now. Every week we take you inside the moments, the rivalries, and the truths that mainstream coverage glosses over. You deserve the full story. We deliver it. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and never miss what happens next.